Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling something huge. We're looking at a series of events, of operations and political earthquakes that have basically torn up the old rulebook for global conflict.
They really have.
We're not just looking back at history here. We're trying to piece together a new strategic calculus, one that's being written in real time. And it's happening, mostly in the shadows and almost always with this kind of surgical precision.
That's exactly the right frame. Our mission for this deep dive is to get past the headlines and really distill the lessons from these conflicts. We're talking about everything from, capturing heads of state to revolutions that spark on social media, all the way to weaponizing everyday logistics.
It's a fundamental transformation.
It is. We're seeing intelligence superiority, this idea of technological asymmetry and logistics. They've, in so many ways, replaced the old need for just massing huge armies on a border.
Okay, so let's unpack that. We have sources that detail this really intense period, roughly from 2011 up to 2026. And it covers these just mind-bending events, penetrating hardened nuclear sites buried under mountains, seizing sitting presidents from their capitals.
And revolutions that happen in the span of a weekend.
Right. And the common thread, the thing that ties all of this together, seems to be this deliberate blurring of boundaries. We're not in these neat little boxes anymore, like war, peace, or even crime. It feels like a single, seamless continuum of conflict.
A continuum is the perfect word for it. It respects no conventional borders. We're looking at scenarios where the old rules, these Westphalian ideas of sovereignty and engagement, are being bent, and in some cases they're just snapping completely.
So the actions we're about to break down, they're drawn from major military, intelligence, political events, and they show how the line between law enforcement, intelligence gathering, and a kinetic military strike is just...
It's functionally disappeared. And understanding that confluence, that merging, is absolutely the key to grasping this new grammar of power.
Okay, before we jump into the deep end, let's give everyone a preview of that aha moment that really defines this whole shift. It's something our sources just illustrate so powerfully.
It's a stunning contrast.
It is. If you just compare the cost of a massive conventional asset, take Russia's strategic bomber fleet, for example, we're estimating that at around $7 billion.
A huge capital investment.
A huge investment. Now, compare that to the cost of the asymmetrical weapons that were used to cripple a third of that fleet. We're talking about drones that cost maybe a few $1,000s a piece.
Some as low as a few
The
hundred.
numbers don't even seem real.
And that disproportionate power, that is the critical thread running through this entire deep dive. It's this idea that capital intensity is being defeated by ingenuity, by patience, by placement.
So let's start with how this shift challenges the very idea of a sovereign nation. We have two major targeted removal operations that really set the stage here. The original template, Operation Neptune Spear, and the more recent, and I think you could say legally provocative, Operation Absolute Resolve.
Exactly. Let's start there.
So we begin with Operation Absolute Resolve. This is January 3rd, 2026. This is the moment the United States reaches deep into Venezuela, into Caracas, and physically extracts President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores.
Right.
This wasn't just a political move. It felt like a profound statement about global reach, a tactical masterpiece, really.
It was an operation that showcased, on one hand, this immense tactical capability, but on the other, an immense geopolitical risk. The sources we have confirm this was just meticulously choreographed. U.S. Special Operations Forces inserting under the cover of darkness.
And they had help. The city went dark.
A coordinated, citywide blackout. It just plunged Caracas into sudden silence, confusion, and within a few hours, Maduro and Flores are extracted, they're blindfolded, they're airborne, and they're on their way to a detention center in Brooklyn.
And from the U.S. perspective, it was a tactical success. They achieved their primary goal, 0 American fatalities, but the cost for Venezuela was significant.
It was. Our sources cite a number of local and independent reports that place the Venezuelan casualties, and that includes both military and civilians caught in the crossfire, somewhere between 80 and 115 people.
So, surgical for the force doing the insertion, but pretty destructive for the host nation.
Precisely. And that brings us right to the core strategic innovation and, the controversy of absolute resolve. The U.S. government didn't frame this as an act of war. It wasn't an invasion or even regime change in the traditional sense.
They called it what?
They explicitly framed it as a law enforcement action.
A law enforcement action. I mean, critics must have immediately jumped on that. How can you call seizing a sitting head of state on foreign soil law enforcement? That just sounds like a semantic shield for an invasion.
And that is the exact point of tension the operation was designed to create. The legal framing was everything.
Okay.
The entire justification from the U.S. side relied on existing counter-narcotics authorities and this thing called the Valor Act.
The Valor Act. Let's break that down.
It stands for the Victims of Authoritarian and Lawless Regimes Act, and it essentially authorizes the pursuit of foreign criminal targets who have been designated as narco-terrorists, even if they happen to hold the title of president.
So the indictments against Maduro from 2020, which were unsealed right before the raid in 2026, they were the legal key.
They were the key. The argument was that those indictments transformed Maduro from a sovereign leader who would be protected under international law into a criminal fugitive.
So they were basically applying domestic U.S. criminal law on a global scale. They treated the entire Venezuelan leadership less like a government and more like a transnational drug cartel.
That is the profound philosophical and geopolitical question the operation forces us to ask. When does a government cease to be a government and become a cartel with a flag?
And by pulling this off under the banner of law enforcement, the executive branch in the U.S. got to do what exactly?
They bypassed the entire messy political debate. They bypassed the congressional authorization that a declaration of war or even a normal military intervention would absolutely require. It sets a precedent that, fundamentally undermines the whole concept of state sovereignty that's governed the world for centuries.
What was the reaction from the rest of the world to this legal maneuver?
Yeah.
They must have burned an immense amount of political capital.
The reaction was fractured, and it really reflected the growing global divide. Key U.S. allies, especially in the hemisphere, they gave this sort of tacit, off-the-record support. They saw removing Maduro as a necessary stabilization measure.
But Russia, China.
Russia, China, and Iran condemned it immediately, called it an illegal act of aggression. They warned that this opens the door for any powerful nation to just go and abduct any leader they decide is a criminal. So yes, the geopolitical cost was high. It solidified anti-U.S. alliances. But the operational success demonstrated the strategic utility of this novel legal mechanism.
This level of precision, though, it suggests this wasn't a quick decision. The sources describe the prep work as almost obsessive, forensic.
It was meticulous. The planning started in mid-2025, and it involved this huge coordination across a whole spectrum of agencies. You had the CIA for intel collection, the DOJ and FBI handling the legal side, and the custody transfer.
And the DEA.
And the DEA, which was crucial for grounding the whole action in counter-narcotics law. The entire intelligence effort was aimed at vulnerability analysis.
Which means reconstructing Maduro's entire existence, his pattern of life, as they call it.
Exactly. The analyst rebuilt everything. His daily routes, his residences, his security rotations, even these seemingly mundane details like his diet, his coffee habits.
And how did they get that level of detail?
The sources are clear on this. It came from sustained human intelligence inside the Venezuelan regime itself. It's a reminder that these authoritarian security structures, they look so strong from the outside, but they're often fragile. They're riddled with leaks, susceptible to internal fractures.
And that human intelligence became critical after the less kinetic efforts failed. Tell us about this road not taken.
Right. The sources detail a 16-month failed CIA defection plot. This started in early 2024. The target was Maduro's chief pilot, a man named General Bitner Villegas. The U.S. tried to leverage him, offering him huge amounts of money protection.
To do what? Just fly the presidential plane somewhere else?
That was the idea. Divert the plane during a routine flight. But Villegas went public, reaffirmed his loyalty, and the whole effort just collapsed.
And that was the pivot point.
That was the pivot. The failure confirmed that a soft power extraction by persuasion was impossible. The operational logic then shifted violently from defection to disruptive kinetic action. They knew they had to physically breach his defenses.
Which brings us to the execution phase. And it didn't start with boots on the ground. It started with silent, invisible warfare.
The operation kicked off at exactly 1 a.m. local time with that massive coordinated blackout. U.S. cyber and electronic warfare units triggered these cascading failures across the power grids in Caracas, the communications networks. They blinded the city.
So that cyber attack came first. cyber precedence.
And it was immediately followed by precision strikes. The goal was to guarantee air superiority for the helicopters that were coming in.
What were they hitting in that first kinetic wave?
The focus was on any air defense system that could threaten that helicopter corridor. So precision-guided munitions took out key surface-to-air missile platforms, specifically the Russian-made Buk M2E systems, across 4 different states.
So they cleared a path?
They created an invisible, temporary highway for the insertion.
And that insertion force was a massive display of power projection.
It was. The total mission involved around 20 helicopters, most likely Blackhawks, some of them launching from the USS Iwo Jima, which was waiting offshore. But the broader support package involved over 150 aircraft globally.
And on the ground.
Elite U.S. Army Delta Force operators inserted directly into Fuerte Tuna, which is Caracas's main military complex and the known location of Maduro's secure residences.
Fuerte Tuna. That was designed to be the ultimate fortress. How close did Maduro actually get to escaping the raid?
The sources indicate he was trying to get to these deep, steel-reinforced safe rooms. He apparently reached a final steel door just before U.S. forces breached the area.
Was there a fight?
A brief but very intense firefight with his immediate security detail. They were quickly neutralized. Maduro and Flores were restrained within minutes.
And here's that crucial legal detail again. They weren't just captured by Delta Force, who were military personnel.
No, and this was a non-negotiable detail for the White House. They were formally taken into custody by DOJ officials who were inserted directly into Fuerte Tuna on site.
So a U.S. prosecutor effectively read him his rights in his own bunker.
That physical transfer of custody to law enforcement officials on Venezuelan soil was absolutely necessary to maintain the integrity of the law enforcement action legal narrative. From there, they were flown to the Iwo Jima, then to an Air National Guard base in New York, and finally to face federal charges.
The sources compare this to the capture of Manuel Noriega in Panama back in 1989. But the distinction is just. It's stark.
It's fundamental to understanding this new grammar of war. Noriega's capture required a full-scale invasion, Operation Just Cause. 27,000 troops, it was a hammer.
And absolute resolve.
Absolute resolve was a scalpel, surgical, rapid, high-tech, and wrapped in a legal framework designed to manage the geopolitical fallout. It shows that modern power favors intelligence penetration and cyber warfare over mass invasion.
So to really understand the DNA of absolute resolve, you have to go back to its doctrinal predecessor. You have to revisit Operation Neptune Spear.
Exactly. The raid that killed Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, Pakistan, on May 2, 2011, this was the original template, the blueprint for a unilateral, intelligence-driven intrusion into a sovereign, if not exactly allied state.
Neptune Spear didn't just take out a high-value target. It really established a playbook for how you balance extreme political risk with necessary tactical action.
That's it. It established the principle that the risk of violating the sovereignty of a nominal ally, in this case Pakistan, was outweighed by the long-term cost of allowing a major enemy combatant to just remain at large. It was the culmination of patience, of network analysis, and immense political courage.
And the patience part of that is so crucial. This wasn't some lucky break. The sources really emphasize this was a slow, frustrating, almost decade-long process of unraveling intelligence.
A process based almost entirely on tracking down bin Laden's most trusted courier, a man named Abu Ahmad al-Kuwaiti.
So for years, they were just watching this one guy, or trying to find him.
Trying to find him first. Years of detainee interrogations gave them these tiny, fragmented clues. It took dedicated CIA analysts just painstakingly cross-referencing these fragments to eventually track al-Kuwaiti's movements and then finally identify that suspicious compound in Abbottabad in mid-2010. The evidence was built brick by slow, careful brick.
And the compound itself was just screaming red flags to the analysts, wasn't it?
It was an intelligence anomaly. I mean, you have these high triple-layered walls topped with barbed wire. The residents are burning their trash instead of putting it out for collection. No phone lines, no internet lines run into the main building.
They were trying to be ghosts?
They were actively trying to erase their existence from the modern digital footprint.
And yet, even with all of those anomalies pointing to a high-value target being inside, the intelligence was never 100% certain.
And this is maybe the most high-stakes detail in the sources.
Right.
The CIA only ever assessed a 50 to 80% likelihood that bin Laden was actually inside.
50%, that's a coin toss.
It's a high-stakes coin toss, absolutely. The decision that President Obama had to make was based on an informed probability, not on absolute proof, and that required extraordinary risk management.
So there was a debate. They could have used a drone strike, or even a B-2 bomber. Why choose the high-risk option, the boots-on-the-ground special operations raid?
The deciding factors were really threefold: positive identification, intelligence recovery, and narrative closure.
Okay, break those down.
An airstrike would have risked huge collateral damage. It would have left bin Laden possibly unidentifiable in the rubble, and it would have destroyed any chance to get the intelligence that was inside that compound. A special ops raid ensured they could get his body for DNA confirmation.
A positive ID.
And just as importantly, capture the hard drives, the documents, the computers that would prove vital for future counterterrorism operations around the world, the intelligence recovery, and finally, the narrative closure for the American people.
The mission itself was a marvel of stealth tech.
It was. The strike force was 23 SEALs from Dev-Ugru SEAL Team 6, an interpreter, and the combat dog, Cairo. They were flown in by the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers.
And they used these special helicopters.
2 stealth-modified MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters. These were customized with composite materials, advanced acoustic suppression to reduce both their radar signature and their noise footprint. It's what allowed them to fly deep into Pakistani airspace, completely undetected.
But even with all that planning, they hit a snag immediately. One of the helicopters crash-landed inside the compound.
It did. An unexpected aerodynamic issue caused by the high walls trapping the heat from the rotor wash. But the contingency response is what defined the professionalism of the mission. The SEALs and the Night Stalkers, they didn't abort. They just seamlessly transitioned. A third helicopter was called in, and the SEALs continued moving through the compound.
And they destroyed the downed helicopter before they left.
Had to. They blew it up to prevent any of that stealth technology from being compromised.
The whole operation, from the raid to the removal of the body, its transport to the USS Carl Vinson, the burial at sea, that was all strategic, wasn't it?
Entirely. Denying him a physical burial site prevented it from becoming a shrine, a rallying point for his followers. Neptune's spear really set the benchmark for this kind of high-risk, high-reward counterterrorism. It laid the doctrinal foundation for the kind of targeted erosion of sovereignty we saw later with absolute resolve.
The key takeaway being that strategic force projection no longer requires these huge massed armies.
It requires surgical intelligence fused with technological mastery.
Okay, so we've talked about the surgical removal of leaders. Now let's pivot to the surgical removal of strategic capability. The idea that you can penetrate even the most deeply buried assets. This brings us to Operation Midnight Hammer in June of 2025, targeting Iran's nuclear facilities.
This operation was a monumental demonstration. It proved that in modern strategic conflict, there is really no place left on Earth that can be considered safe just because of geological depth or physical fortification.
The challenge was immense.
It was. Iran had deliberately put its key nuclear facilities, Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan, deep inside mountains, reinforced them with layers of concrete and rock. The whole design was to survive a standard conventional strike. They used geology as their primary shield.
And this operation, this structural intervention, happened during the really extreme tensions of the ongoing Iran-Israel war.
It did. U.S. and allied officials framed the strikes as defensive. They were aimed at preventing Iran from crossing an irreversible nuclear threshold that, years of diplomacy and inspections had failed to stop. And to do that, they needed a weapon that could literally rewrite geography.
And that weapon is the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator. The MOP.
The MOP is just a true marvel of kinetic engineering. It weighs 30,000 pounds. It's not designed to create a giant explosion on the surface. A better way to think of it is as a supersonic chisel.
A supersonic chisel, I like that.
It uses its massive weight, plus incredibly high velocity on impact, to achieve this immense kinetic energy. That energy lets the weapon defeat layer after layer of concrete and rock. We're talking penetrating hundreds of feet before the powerful internal explosive charge detonates.
So the explosion happens after the chisel has already done its work.
Exactly, after the structural defeat has occurred.
And this capability, this supersonic chisel, it wasn't developed overnight. The sources emphasize that the successful use of the MOP in 2025 was really the end result of 15 years of institutional patience and specialized development.
The planning involved 2 critical parallel tracks. First, for over a decade, intelligence agencies were meticulously mapping Iran's hardened architecture. They needed to know the exact dimensions, the tunnel layouts, the concrete thickness of a place like Fordo. They needed the precise coordinates where the rock was thinnest.
So one track was intelligence. What was the other?
The other was the actual weapon engineering. That fell largely to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA. They spent years modeling and simulating exactly how to defeat these deeply buried targets. The GBU-57 MOP was the direct result of those calculations, so Midnight Hammer was less a spontaneous reaction to a crisis.
And more the predictable result of a long-term investment in solving this one specific problem.
Exactly.
A strike of this scale, using this very specific hardware, it requires total operational surprise. How did they possibly mask a massive air package capable of global reach and striking Iran?
Through a highly effective global misdirection campaign. A decoy. To draw attention and resources away from the true strike core, they deliberately sent 2 B-2 Spirit bombers westward, towards Guam.
They sent 2 B-2s the wrong way around the world.
The wrong way, and they did it visibly. They conducted scheduled refueling stops over Oklahoma, California, Hawaii, open-source flight trackers, global defense analysts. Everyone was watching this decoy move across the Pacific.
So the world was watching the shadow play to the west, while the real hammer was swinging from the east. What was the scale of that true strike force?
The real package was immense. It was incredibly complex to coordinate. We're talking over 125 aircraft participating in the total operation. But the core of the strike force was built around 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers.
Flying from where?
Non-stop from Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri. It's a monumental feat of endurance, and it was supported by dozens of refueling tankers that gave them that global reach.
And the B-2s weren't flying alone.
No, they were accompanied by F-35A Lightning II fighters. They were crucial for air defense suppression, electronically jamming and kinetically neutralizing any Iranian radar systems or aircraft that tried to challenge the B-2's approach.
So this was the MOP's combat debut. How many did they use?
The main kinetic power was focused on the deepest sites. 14 MOPs were dropped on Fordo and Natanz. At the same time, cruise missiles were handling the surrounding infrastructure. More than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from a guided missile submarine that was operating covertly in the region. They struck the surface and semi-buried infrastructure at the Isfahan nuclear research complex.
So all in all, something like 75 precision-guided munitions deployed over 37 hours. And not a single U.S. aircraft was lost. The scale of the coordination, the technological supremacy, it's just staggering.
It confirmed the viability of global, non-stop stealth strike operations. Post-strike assessments confirmed severe structural damage. It violently reset Iran's estimated nuclear timeline by several years.
It sent a message.
It sent a message that even the most fortified assets are just temporary achievements against a persistent, technologically advanced adversary.
So Midnight Hammer achieved its short-term goal, disruption. But did it achieve strategic closure? What does this operation tell us about the longer-term strategic calculation?
That is the critical ambiguity, isn't it? While the operation showed the U.S. could enforce its red lines kinetically, unilaterally, the strategic question remains. Did this actually stabilize the region? Or did it just accelerate Iran's determination to rebuild, not just harder and deeper, but maybe more distributed, more resilient against a future single strike?
It feels like it just kicks off a new kind of arms race. The race between the depth of your bunker and the depth of your enemy's penetration technology.
Precisely. If we look at Midnight Hammer, the new measure of power isn't territory or even aircraft carriers. It's depth, precision, and persistence. It proved the decisive advantage of integration of intelligence, engineering, cyber, air, and naval power, all acting as one seamless, high-velocity system.
The ability to strike a target on the far side of the globe, buried hundreds of feet under rock, defines modern strategic dominance.
Right. The conclusion is stark. There are no longer any safe depths. There are only technological thresholds that, once you cross them, invite this level of surgical deterrence.
And that gives a major power, this strategic freedom of action. The ability to conduct these highly consequential structural interventions from half a world away, resetting an adversary's capabilities without having to launch a conventional ground war.
It's deterrence by assured destruction of strategic assets, delivered with total control based on decades of intelligence collection.
So we've covered the highest end of kinetic power, the stealth bombers, the supersonic chisels. Now, let's just flip the conversation entirely and look at how the cheapest, most ubiquitous assets can be weaponized with, equal if not greater strategic consequence.
Yes, this is asymmetric ingenuity.
This is where that opening aha moment really lands. What happens when an adversary just decides to substitute sheer ingenuity and unconventional tactics for capital and conventional force?
They leveraged the very systems designed for peace against the defender.
And Operation Spider's Web is the perfect illustration. June 1st, 2025. Ukraine launches this highly asymmetrical attack using 117 low-cost FPV kamikaze drones that were smuggled deep into Russia.
The strategic outcome was arguably more significant than many conventional airstrikes. The attack resulted in more than 40 high-value Russian aircraft being destroyed or severely damaged.
And we're talking about their core strategic asset.
Core strategic assets. 295MS and 222M3 strategic bombers. These are the platforms that launch their long-range cruise missiles. And critically, the very rare A-50 airborne early warning and control aircraft.
Losing an A-50 is a huge blow to their command and control. It degrades their situational awareness across multiple fronts, and the numbers, again, they just demand attention. Russia's total loss is estimated at around $7 billion.
And the drones that did it?
The drones cost between $200 and $500 per unit.
It's a fundamental disruption of the economics of defense.
Yeah.
Ukraine didn't engage in some costly air-to-air dogfight. They went upstream. They patiently delivered these low-cost munitions to destroy high-cost platforms while they were just sitting on the ground thousands of kilometers from the front line.
But how? How do you logistically support an operation with over 100 drones deep inside enemy territory without getting caught?
It was an 18-month exercise in covert, methodical patience. Operatives smuggled components for about 150 drones, plus launch systems and 300 payloads, through routine, often commercial routes, beneath the noise floor of standard commerce.
So the sophistication was hidden inside the mundane.
The brilliance was the banality of it. Nothing attracts less suspicion than just an ordinary cargo shipment crossing a border.
And the launch mechanism was the real tactical innovation here. The trucks themselves became the delivery system.
Exactly. The key was mobility and proximity. The drones were concealed in these wooden modular cabins that were mounted onto standard cargo trucks. These trucks effectively became disposable, mobile aircraft carriers.
So they could just drive up near the target airbase.
Drive up to a remote roadside lay-by or a discrete industrial area, maybe 2,000 kilometers inside Russia, and launch.
And launching from that close has a massive tactical advantage over trying to use long-range missiles or drones from the border.
It bypasses the entire multi-layered air defense infrastructure. By starting the attack just a few kilometers away, the FPV drones were already past the range of long-range systems like the S-300 and the Panzer. It reduced the reaction time for base security to just seconds. It completely overwhelmed perimeter defenses that were designed to face threats from the outside, not from the inside.
It's ambush warfare at scale.
Ambush warfare at scale, executed with unparalleled strategic patience. It is genuinely unsettling to think that the same semi-truck you passed on the highway could secretly be a mobile aircraft carrier, capable of inflicting billions of dollars in damage.
Yeah, it's the new reality. And the timing striking on Russia's Military Transport Aviation Day, that added a psychological layer.
A critical one. It transformed a military setback into a narrative humiliation. It degraded morale, it undermined prestige, and it asserted that Russia's vaunted strategic depth was an illusion.
The conclusion for military planners everywhere seems stark. Your defense budget, optimized for these expensive threats, is completely vulnerable to cheap, pre-positioned systems powered by organizational creativity.
That's it.
So if tropes can be weaponized, so can the most basic consumer electronics. Operation Grim Beeper, the Mossad-attributed operation against Hezbollah, showed that the supply chain is definitively the new strategic terrain, and trust is the most vulnerable asset of all.
This is a textbook example of exploiting an asymmetric vulnerability through extreme long-term patience. For years, Hezbollah was terrified of sophisticated Israeli cyber penetration, so they intentionally reverted to obsolete low-tech communication tools.
Pagers and walkie-talkies.
Pagers and walkie-talkies. They had this mistaken belief that simplicity equaled security, that it made them impervious to digital espionage.
They sought security in obsolescence, and that decision turned out to be catastrophic. Our sources call this the long con, a decade-long strategy of infiltration and deception.
That's exactly what it was. The operation had multiple phases. Phase 1 started way back, around 2014. It focused on infiltrating Hezbollah's established procurement channels. Operatives quietly modified more than 16,000 walkie-talkies.
Wow.
They embedded small, undetectable quantities of high explosives, probably PTN, inside the battery compartments of the devices, either as they were being manufactured or as they passed through third-party intermediaries.
So the danger was just lying dormant inside their trusted communications gear for almost a decade. And then came the pagers, which was an even more sophisticated deception.
Right. Phase 2, from 2022 to 2024, involved creating entirely new shell companies. As Hezbollah started sourcing new pagers, Israeli intelligence built these fake firms that mimicked legitimate global manufacturers, specifically a company in Taiwan called Gold Apollo.
So they didn't just tamper with existing products, they manufactured the threat from scratch.
From scratch. They produced and sold thousands of these enhanced pagers, complete with professional packaging, convincing fake YouTube ads, professional branding, everything designed to build absolute trust in the product. The Trojan horse was beautifully branded.
The weapon was trusted, familiar, delivered right into the hands of the entire organization. And then what?
Then, at 3:30 p.m. on September 17, 2024, the system was activated. Encrypted command messages were sent simultaneously to thousands of pagers. These messages, whether they were received or ignored, they triggered the detonation of the embedded explosives. And that was followed by hundreds of walkie-talkie detonations the next day.
The human toll was immediate and tragic, and it reflects the indiscriminate nature of the attack, given how deeply Hezbollah is embedded in civilian areas.
The sources report thousands of simultaneous detonations across Lebanon and Syria. It injured over 3,000 people and killed between 12 and 37, including high-level Hezbollah operatives, but also civilians, and 2 children who were using the devices.
And the immediate tactical and psychological impact on Hezbollah.
Catastrophic collapse of their internal command and control. Fighters were forced to just abandon their devices instantly. They had to revert to unreliable, slow, face-to-face communication. And psychologically, every beep became a threat. Every battery was a suspected bomb. The operational hesitation and paranoia that created, that was invaluable. It paved the way for subsequent, more conventional strikes.
Our sources note the fierce ethical debate this operation sparked around the world. The fact that these devices went off in civilian environments, homes, markets, even ambulances, that was highly controversial.
It was. Critics focused on the indiscriminate violence, the use of civilian infrastructure as a delivery mechanism. They argued it crossed a dangerous ethical line on collateral damage. Supporters countered that Hezbollah's systematic embedding within civilian society makes a clean attack, one that only hits operatives, functionally impossible.
It forces a critical, unresolved question on the world.
When conflict is deliberately woven into the fabric of daily life, can military attacks ever remain purely surgical?
Regardless of the ethical conclusion, the strategic implication is undeniable. Supply chains are now strategic terrain, and manipulating trust through deception can be weaponized more effectively than conventional firepower.
Grim Beeper established a new grammar of war, one where conflict is waged with logistics, spreadsheets, shell companies, and theater. It proved that the deadliest weapon might already be in your pocket, placed there years ago by an unseen adversary.
Okay, so we've seen surgical penetration and asymmetric ingenuity. Now let's examine how major powers are redefining a deterrence in an age where kinetic escalation has to be managed against the ever-present shadow of nuclear confrontation. This is managed escalation, warfare driven by geometry and calculation, not by proximity or total conquest.
And Operation Sindoor, launched by India in May 2025, is a masterful case study in this kind of carefully calibrated deterrence. It was triggered by a severe terrorist attack in Pahalgam on April 22, 2025. It killed 26 civilians, and India attributed it to Pakistan-sponsored extremist groups.
The strategic challenge is just monumental. How does India punish an act of terror and establish deterrence without triggering a full-scale war with a nuclear-armed state like Pakistan?
The doctrinal shift was the key. They moved away from a purely symbolic or reactive response to a strategy of precision punishment. The idea is deterrence based not on denial, making infiltration impossible, but by assured, measured retaliation that raises the cost of future attacks above an acceptable threshold.
And this was India's first true non-contact war.
It was. The operation was governed by these really strict escalation limits. No ground troop incursions, no territorial occupation, and reliance almost entirely on standoff weapons to avoid deep airspace penetration.
So the objective was to deliver a punishing blow while signaling absolute control over the escalation ladder.
It's warfare by geometry, not proximity. That's the concept.
The name of the operation, Sindoor, which means life and continuity in Hindu culture, that seems chosen to reinforce the domestic resolve and moral legitimacy of the action.
It was a powerful political signal. It framed the response not just as a military necessity, but as a moral response to the targeting of civilians. It reinforced domestic unity while communicating resolute resolve to Pakistan.
So what did they hit? The kinetic strikes targeted 9 specific locations.
Yes. Between May 6th and 10th, 9 identified targets were struck. 5 were logistical and training sites in Pakistan-administered Kashmir, and 4 were high-value targets in mainland Pakistan, including extremist operations centers near Bahawalpur and Muridgeh.
And the choice of targets emphasized discrimination, hitting terror infrastructure, not military bases, which is key to managing de-escalation.
Absolutely.
And what were the tools of this non-contact deterrence?
India used a blend of high-end capabilities designed for standoff operations. So standoff precision-guided munitions, BrahMos-class systems or equivalents, extensive use of drones for targeting and rapid damage assessment, and their Rafale fighter aircraft providing air superiority and the launch capability.
And the sources note that Indian aircraft largely avoided sustained penetration of Pakistani airspace, relying instead on range and accuracy.
That was the core geometric restraint. Despite claims and counterclaims, there were reports of some minor aerial engagements between Indian Rafales and Pakistani J-10s. Neither side crossed that critical threshold into a deep, sustained conflict. India later conferred gallantry awards, solidifying the narrative of controlled success.
And the strategic message landed.
The message landed clearly. India's response window had shortened dramatically. Retaliation would be assured, it would be technological, and it would be politically conscious.
So, Sindor established this preference for technology-centric standoff warfare. It demonstrated a model for 2 nuclear-armed states to engage in meaningful conflict while managing escalation. Its power without the need for physical occupation.
It redrew the expectations about the consequences of cross-border terrorism in South Asia. The challenge remains the same, but the means of addressing it are now entirely defined by precision and calibration.
So if Operation Sindor showed conflict being carefully managed, the events after October 7, 2023 showed the exact opposite. A conflict that cascaded uncontrollably, becoming this sprawling perpetual condition. We're talking about Israel's 8-front war.
The Hamas-led assault on October 7th, 1,200 Israelis killed, 251 hostages taken. It was a strategic shock that just completely shattered Israel's decades-old assumptions about deterrence and technological intelligence supremacy.
And then what came next wasn't a single campaign.
No, it was a cascade. The simultaneous activation of these pre-positioned proxy networks that Iran had cultivated for years.
And this expansion wasn't linear, it was radial. It turned into a systemic exposure across 8 distinct kinetic and ideological fronts.
That structural exposure is the key insight. The 8 fronts include the primary kinetic areas: Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Yemen, Houthis, Syria, Iraq, and Iran itself, plus the non-kinetic but profoundly damaging global anti-Semitism front.
It's the first modern example of a fully integrated multi-vector proxy war fused with global ideological mobilization. So let's detail the kinetics, starting with Front 1, Gaza, which became the gravitational center of the whole conflict.
The sources confirm this saw one of the most intense bombing and ground campaigns of the 21st century. By 2026, sources are reporting over 66,600 fatalities in Gaza. The campaign achieved massive destruction of infrastructure and the successful elimination of several high-level Hamas leaders, including Yahya Sinwar.
Right.
But Hamas was severely degraded, but ultimately not eliminated. The strategic paradox here is critical. Maximum destruction without strategic closure. The conflict just persists as an ongoing counterinsurgency.
And the escalation immediately spread to Front 2, the West Bank.
The West Bank quickly transformed into a high-tension zone. We saw a surge in daily IDF raids, which, combined with often unchecked settler violence, led to clashes with Palestinian militants. The sources note large-scale displacement, over 40,000 people displaced due to violence and restricted movement. Military activity managed to contain a full-scale third intifada, but the political and humanitarian vacuum only deepened.
Moving north, Front 3, Lebanon. Hezbollah proved it could sustain a high-volume threat.
Hezbollah launched over 8,000 rockets and artillery rounds across the northern border. Israel responded aggressively with targeted assassinations, precision airstrikes, and eventually a limited ground incursion in September 2024 to push Hezbollah forces back from the border.
So Hezbollah was damaged.
Militarily damaged, yes. Its aura of invincibility was cracked, but its vast arsenal and command structure remained largely intact, capable of threatening northern Israel indefinitely.
And then the war jumped oceans. It metastasized into Front 4, Yemen, hitting global shipping through the Houthis.
The Houthis leveraged their strategic location to impose immense global strategic friction. By firing drones and missiles at Israel and, crucially, disrupting Red Sea shipping, they showed how low-cost, decentralized actors can impose these disproportionate costs on the global economy.
And Israel responded.
With long-range strikes operation Lucky Drop in August 2025 on Houthi infrastructure in Sana'a and Al-Hudaydah port. But the Houthis remained defiant, undeterred. They proved very difficult to neutralize with conventional air power.
Front 5. Syria saw a major geopolitical shift with the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December 2024.
That political collapse created a vacuum that Israel moved swiftly to fill. Leveraging the chaos, Israel executed over 330 airstrikes in the months that followed, effectively destroying up to 80% of Syria's air defense systems and significantly expanding its operational influence. This was strategic depth acquired through regional instability.
Okay, so Front 6 in Iraq saw occasional attacks, but Front 7 Iran saw the ultimate taboo crack. Direct state-on-state confrontation.
This was the defining moment of the regional conflict, a 12-day Israel-Iran war in June 2025 that involved explicit direct missile and drone exchanges. Both sides targeted high-value military and infrastructure sites, including facilities related to Iran's missile stockpiles and nuclear programs.
Was there a winner?
Damage was inflicted, but neither side achieved a decisive victory. But the threshold against direct war was crossed, redefining the regional security architecture to one of overt hostility.
Finally, the ideological and civilizational front, Front 8. Global anti-Semitism. This front has no physical borders, no military ceiling.
And this is perhaps the most enduring and pervasive front. The conflict weaponized identity across transnational borders. Jewish communities worldwide faced physical attacks, severe campus exclusion, and organized pogrom-like violence. Our sources cite a specific event in Amsterdam in 2024 as an example.
It showed that the effects of October 7th didn't stop at the border of Israel.
They spread into the cultural, psychological, and physical security spaces of Jewish communities worldwide.
And domestically, the political cost fractured Israeli society itself.
Critically so. The sources document over 2,600 anti-government protests, deep disputes over the priority of retrieving hostages versus achieving military objectives, and a widespread erosion of public trust in the leadership. Israel finds itself militarily dominant in the region, but strategically extended across 8 fronts and politically isolated internationally.
Locked into a condition of low-intensity perpetual conflict.
That's it. The war is a condition, not a campaign. And victory, as traditionally defined, is no longer attainable in this model of systemic exposure. It revealed a system that was already primed for ignition, showing how rapidly a regional crisis can metastasize into a global strategic challenge.
We've explored kinetic power, asymmetry, geopolitical containment. Let's pivot now to the power of pure digital disruption in the political sphere. Nepal's Gen Z revolution in September 2025 is, well, it's a terrifying blueprint. It shows that governments can fall faster than their own constitutions can physically respond.
This event is vital because it redefined what a rapid political collapse looks like in the digital age. It was the horizontal power of youth organization just shattering a deeply entrenched political order in less than 48 hours.
So what was the spark? The immediate, seemingly minor trigger that ignited this massive collapse.
The immediate trigger was the Ali government's sweeping ban on 26 social media platforms on September 4, 2025. This included TikTok, Facebook, Discord, X. The government claimed it was a regulatory measure, but the population saw it, rightly, as a blatant bid to silence dissent and reassert elite control over the national narrative.
And in Nepal, the youth, people under 30, they make up something like 56% of the population. For them, social media isn't just entertainment, it's
existential infrastructure, it's economic infrastructure, it's political organizing space, it's how they communicate with relatives abroad whose remittances power the entire economy.
And you threaten that infrastructure when the population is already frustrated by these deep systemic grievances.
Exactly. The political stagnation was immense. 3 men, Oli, Prachanda, and Duba, had rotated through the Prime Minister's office more than 18 times since 2008. The youth saw the system as a rotating syndicate of power.
This stagnation fueled viral outrage. Campaigns like #NepoKids, which highlighted massive elite corruption set against a backdrop of crushing 20% youth unemployment.
Our sources identify this fundamental disconnect. The system was procedurally democratic, they held elections, but it was substantively autocratic. The faces changed, but the outcomes of corruption and elite entrenchment never did. The youth felt perpetually locked out.
So the population was highly combustible when their digital access was suddenly cut off.
Right.
So the spark hit the tinder. How quickly did this escalate from a protest to a full-on state collapse?
The velocity was unprecedented. Day 1, September 8th, you see protests erupt. But the organization is horizontal and digitally native. It's not organized by traditional political parties or unions. It's happening on Discord servers, encrypted VPN chats, and through QR code flyers.
In the mood.
At first, it was almost carnivalesque. Dancers, skateboarders, satire. But the mood turned lethal when police used live ammunition, killing 19 protesters.
The use of deadly force transformed the protest into a full-scale uprising.
Instantly. Day 2, September 9th, the state's authority just melted away. Kathmandu was engulfed in riots. Crowds stormed and torched key government buildings, party offices. In a critical blow to the state's monopoly on force, protesters breached multiple prisons, releasing over 13,500 inmates.
The speed of the collapse was faster than the government could physically mobilize security forces.
It was. Prime Minister Oli resigned by that evening, less than 48 hours after the mass protests began.
And the defining feature of this whole revolution was the complete lack of a conventional hierarchy.
That is the crucial lesson for the rest of the world. The movement had no single charismatic leader, no central committee, no pre-written manifesto. It relied entirely on horizontal organization through decentralized digital networks. The largest Discord group grew to over 100,000 members, coordinating logistics, medical aid, strategy, all in real time, making decisions through rapid consensus and online polls.
And this horizontal structure led to that historic, maybe temporary experiment in digital governance.
Yes. In that moment of absolute political vacuum, thousands of participants voted online via the Discord server to select a former Chief Justice, Sushila Karki, as interim prime minister.
So for a moment, the government was basically a Reddit thread.
The sources used a fascinating metaphor. A nation briefly governed like an open-source project. Legitimacy flowed instantaneously from a digital network consensus, not from traditional constitutional mechanisms.
That velocity is a terrifying lesson for entrenched regimes everywhere.
It demonstrated that digital natives, when motivated by generational grievances, can organize and mobilize at a scale and speed that legacy institutions, which are designed to respond to slower top-down threats, they simply cannot defend against. And they were openly studying the blueprints from recent regional events, specifically Sri Lanka in 2022 and Bangladesh in 2024.
But the price of this speed and disruption was catastrophic for Nepal, economically and physically.
Devastating. The uprising resulted in 76 people killed and an estimated $21.2 billion in damage. That's nearly half of Nepal's entire GDP. The sheer scale of arson, looting, the prison breaks. It highlighted the dangers of a state collapsing that quickly without any established, pre-agreed transitional structures in place.
But the global blueprint this event provides is what really matters for our deep dive.
It proved that generational exclusion, gerontocracy, elite corruption, these are global tinderboxes. And the digital tools now available, Discord, VPNs, end-to-end encrypted chats, are inherently faster, less hierarchical, and more improvisational than the old guard.
So what's the one lesson, above all others, that entrenched political classes should be taking from the speed of the Nepal collapse?
That if you try to shut down the digital infrastructure of a highly motivated, restless youth population, you do not silence them. You only teach them how powerful their decentralized networks already are. The ultimate warning is that governments can fall faster than constitutions can respond.
Okay, let's unpack this vast, complex set of sources one last time. We've looked at operations that spanned a decade, like Grim Beeper, and political collapses that took 48 hours, like Nepal. We saw the highest end of technological projection at Midnight Hammer and the lowest end of technological asymmetry in Spider's Web. What is the unified field theory that connects all these seemingly disparate events?
They collectively illustrate this new, single continuum of conflict. It's moving decisively away from the old paradigm of massed force, large armies, and territorial control. The decisive strategic advantage now belongs to the party that can operate with the highest levels of precision, patience, and asymmetry.
I see two major, powerful thematic threads running through all of this. Threads that define this new continuum. First, there's this fundamental willingness to just violently violate sovereignty for immediate tactical objectives. It redefines what an act of war even is versus a criminal pursuit.
That thread absolutely connects Neptune's Spear, Midnight Hammer, and Absolute Resolve. They all demonstrate the functional erosion of state sovereignty. When a foreign power decides that the strategic objective, killing a terrorist, stopping a nuclear program, capturing a narco president, is worth the geopolitical cost. Warfare has effectively merged with law enforcement and intelligence operations into a single toolset.
And the second thread is the vulnerability of previously assumed safe systems and strategic depth.
And that connects Spider's Web, Grim Beeper, and the Nepal Revolution. It reveals that traditional security is an illusion. Geological depth is vulnerable to the MOP. Geographic obscurity is neutralized by FPV drones launched from a truck. Commercial trust is vulnerable to weaponized supply chains. And political stability is fundamentally fragile against decentralized digital mobilization.
So the conflict is no longer about controlling large tracts of land.
It's about controlling networks, logistics, and perceptions.
The very nature of power has shifted so dramatically. If the traditional 20th century measure of power was the size of your army, your fleet, your industrial base, what is the new measure of power in an age defined by stealth bombers, FPV drones, weaponized pagers, and revolutionary social media?
The new measure of power is the velocity and penetration of your network, is the ability to project force, whether that's kinetic or informational, globally, invisibly, and precisely. It's the capacity to make the costs of your opponent's existence unbearable, using their own assumed security systems, their logistics, their consumer electronics, their deeply buried rock against them.
We've detailed operations that lasted mere hours, like the raid in Caracas, but whose strategic and legal consequences are going to unfold for decades. The decisions made in the shadows of Abbottabad, the subtle compromises built into a commercial supply chain, the quickness of a youth revolution, they're all part of the same evolving reality.
And this leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. If the battleground is now everywhere, from deep beneath a mountain in Iran to the battery of a device in your pocket, and if the cost of the most strategically significant weapons is now measured in hundreds of dollars, not billions, what does true security even look like in this new continuum?
When everything is connected, is anything truly secure?
And if the battleground is everywhere, where do we draw the line between necessary security and pervasive surveillance? That is the defining challenge of the new grammar of war.